A few days ago, or a few weeks ago, I have lost track of time entirely. Anyway, when I was shooting our iPad Pro review, I had this gag in the beginning where I was holding up different computers and saying, hey, if you think of computers, you probably think of something like this. And it was great until it wasn't. What you didn't see is that while I was goofing off in front of the camera, my work laptop slid off of my couch and fell face first onto the corner of my coffee table. I've been working on my Windows desktop ever since, and it's great, but the thing about working at home is that you don't want to work at your desk the whole time. Without a functioning laptop screen, I was stuck until Apple's Magic Keyboard showed up. For those of you who don't know, it's a keyboard case with a trackpad for the 2018 and 2020 iPad Pros, and it's an expensive one at that. The 11-inch model is $300, and the 12.9-inch version I've been testing is $350, which is crazy. That's basically iPhone SE money. Now, I can't sit here and tell you this thing is worth it for everyone, because you can put together a perfectly nice combination of a case to prop your iPad up, and a keyboard and a trackpad for less money. I also can't say it's exactly perfect for someone like me, because I'm one of those weird people who enjoys using the iPad as it is, but also can't help but wish that it acted more like a laptop sometimes. In this case, my issue is that the iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard doesn't act enough like a laptop, but we'll get to that. First, I want to dig into the keyboard itself, and you probably don't need me to tell you that Apple's MacBook keyboards were pretty lousy for a couple years there. They have since redesigned the keyboard with new scissor switch keys, and those are what we're working with in the new Magic Keyboard. What can I say? These things feel great to type on. You get a full millimeter of key travel, and maybe more important for your sanity, these keys are much quieter than the older MacBook keyboards, even when you're going at full speed. Speaking of MacBooks, this layout shouldn't take too much time to get used to if you've ever used a 13-inch MacBook Pro. Apart from the lack of function keys, this feels a lot like those laptop keyboards. It's a little narrower, sure, but not to the point where I ever actually noticed. Really, the only thing I don't like about the Magic Keyboard's layout is that it uses 4 super slim arrow keys instead of a big left and right arrow key and a small up and down one. For me, it just makes precision editing of my stories a little more finicky than it has to, but apart from that, the keyboard feels just right. And really, if it's precision you're after, that is what the trackpad is for, which, by the way, is also surprisingly great. I was a little concerned at first because it's much wider than it is tall, and I thought that might lead to issues with vertical scrolling, but the reality wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's perfectly fine for scrolling through web pages and books, and because it's plenty wide, multi-touch gestures like swiping side to side to access your recent apps work beautifully. I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't have turned down a bigger trackpad here, but it's still better than many of the trackpads I've used on Windows laptops. Really, the few problems I've run into while testing the Magic Keyboard aren't even really Apple's fault. Certain apps like Google Docs still haven't been updated to play nice with iPad OS, so you can't easily use the trackpad cursor to select text. And other apps like Lightroom, which I use frequently to edit our review photos, often expect a physical finger on-screen touch instead of whatever virtual equivalent the trackpad is passing through, so you'll occasionally still have to reach up and touch the screen anyway. Now that all modern iPads play nice with trackpads and mice, these issues should get ironed out pretty soon, but for now, you're in for a bit of a wait. Ultimately, the keyboard and the trackpad work really well here, and if you've been looking for a first-class typing experience for your iPad Pro, I don't think you're gonna do any better than this. Here's the thing though. What ultimately should determine whether you buy a Magic Keyboard or not isn't the keyboard itself, it's the overall design. I know that seems a little counterintuitive, but hear me out. With Apple's earlier Smart Keyboard Folio, typing in your lap, for example, could feel, well, pretty precarious. For me, it often felt like my fingers had to pull double duty to type whatever I was working on and also hold the keyboard down so the whole thing didn't tip over backwards. Now, that is not the case with the Magic Keyboard. I wrote our review purely on the iPad Pro and the Magic Keyboard, mostly while lounging in one of those IKEA chairs with the names that I still can't pronounce, Poang. I repeat, you can type on the Magic Keyboard while nestled in a chair and not regret buying it. That's because of a few things. The magnets holding the iPad in place feel really sturdy, and Apple's dual hinge design means the iPad actually hovers in the air above the keyboard. That moves the weight forward, so the whole thing is less likely to tip over. Working on the Magic Keyboard is obviously best on a sturdy, flat surface, but using it propped up on your lap really isn't that bad. I want more than not bad though. What I like most about working on laptops is the flexibility they provide. Prop one up on a table and open it up and you're basically good to go. If you're in an airplane seat and the person in front of you very rudely reclines all the way back, you can just angle your screen forward and try and muddle through. And if you're feeling particularly daring or lazy, I guess, you can stretch out on the couch, prop your legs up at an angle, push the laptop screen back as far as it goes, and you can still get stuff done. The Magic Keyboard sometimes gets close to that level of flexibility, maybe closer than Apple has ever come before with an iPad, but it's still not quite there. You can swivel the iPad from 90 degrees to 130 degrees, which is kind of a limited range of motion for what it is. I cannot begin to tell you the number of times that I wished I could just tilt the iPad back a little bit more. It's super helpful for when you're working on a low table or when you're on the couch trying to get stuff done while you're laying down. Yes, I can write stories on an iPad Pro in places I couldn't before thanks to the Magic Keyboard. Because of that limited swivel though, those limited angles, I still can't work everywhere I want. Since I'm talking about working everywhere anyway, I should also point out that the Magic Keyboard adds quite a bit of weight to the iPad Pro. With this keyboard case attached, the 12.9-inch iPad Pro is just a hair thicker than the 13-inch MacBook Pro and just about as heavy. It's a difference of a fraction of a pound. I wouldn't call this a deal breaker, especially for people who plan to carry around an iPad Pro instead of a laptop anyway, but it's still worth keeping in mind. For that matter, so is the fact that the Magic Keyboard can't fold back behind the iPad. If you wanted to, I don't know, walk around and jot down notes with the Apple Pencil, for example, you'd have to pull the iPad off the case entirely. I personally don't mind that because that's not how I use the iPad generally, but that's the case for a lot of people, and I can imagine them being a little annoyed by this. Oh, and one more thing. Since the Magic Keyboard interfaces with the iPad Pro through the smart connector on the iPad's back, you can charge the iPad using the second USB-C port built right into the keyboard's hinge. Now that's genuinely great. It charges almost as fast as using the iPad's own USB port, and since that connector can now be freed up, you can use it to connect accessories like hard drives or external displays. It would be really cool if you could plug those accessories in through the keyboard's USB-C port, but you can't. Apple doesn't talk about the smart connector specs in public, and the company wouldn't talk to me at all about the connector's data bandwidth, so I just sort of assume it can't move data fast enough to support those more complicated external devices. If you have any more insight into what the smart connector is actually capable of, please hit me up. So, where does that leave us? Well, the iPad Pro is a phenomenal tablet, and with a Magic Keyboard attached, it finally starts to feel like a proper computer. Emphasis on starting. Remember, iPads and iOS weren't originally meant to work like this. Releases like iPadOS and this keyboard are starting to blur the lines between the iPad and the MacBook, and we're sort of in an interesting transitional period as Apple tries to figure out how much those lines should be blurred. But that's a story for another video. Typing on the Magic Keyboard feels excellent. The trackpad is a star. The whole thing is surprisingly elegant and sturdy and just generally nice to use. It won't work everywhere you want it to, or in every situation, but the Magic Keyboard turns the iPad Pro into a fascinating, functional hybrid. And if you can stomach the price, it's mostly a joy to use. That's our review of Apple's Magic Keyboard. Thank you so much for joining me as always. We really appreciate your continued support in these very strange times. We're gonna keep churning out reviews for you. We've got a bunch coming up. So if you have anything you wanna see, any feedback for us, let us know in the comments or drop me an email via engadget.com. Thanks again for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and please take care of each other.